My husband called me at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, while I was standing in the middle of a food expo in Chicago surrounded by sample plates and the smell of truffle oil. "I want a divorce," he said. No build-up, no warning. Just those 4 words and then a pause that felt rehearsed. "And I'm transferring the business to Lila. We're going to run it together. You can keep the house." He said it like he was offering me a gift. I remember looking down at the business card in my hand. A vendor from Portland who made smoked sea salt. And thinking how strange it was that the world kept going. People were still talking and laughing 2 booths over. Someone was offering crackers with goat cheese. My husband had just tried to hand 16 years of my life to another woman, and the fluorescent lights didn't even flicker. "All right," I said. He laughed. It was the laugh he used in client meetings when he thought he had the upper hand. Short. A little too confident. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" "Safe travels," I told him, and I hung up. I finished the expo. I took notes. I sampled a new line of organic hot sauces and booked a follow-up call with a supplier in Nashville. Then I went back to my hotel room, ordered room service, and sat at the small desk by the window watching the Chicago skyline go dark. I wasn't shocked. I want to say that clearly, because people always assume I must have been. But I'd known something was coming for almost 2 years. You don't share a home with someone for 16 years without learning to read the silences. I knew about Lila before he thought I did. I'd seen the texts he thought he'd deleted. I'd noticed the charges on our joint card from a restaurant we'd never been to together. I knew. What people always want to know is why I didn't confront him sooner. The honest answer is that I still loved him. Not blindly. I wasn't naive about what was happening. But I loved the person he used to be, and some part of me kept waiting to see if that person would come back. It took me a long time to accept that he wasn't coming back. That the man I married had chosen greed and convenience over everything we'd built. And once I accepted that, I got to work. The business was called Copper Creek Provisions. We started it out of our kitchen 11 years ago. A small batch catering operation that specialized in farm-to-table event catering in the greater Nashville area. My husband had the personality for it. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they'd been waiting their whole lives for him to show up. Clients loved him. He was the face of Copper Creek, the one who did the presentations and the wine pairings and the handshakes. I was the one who did everything else. I developed every recipe we ever served. I negotiated every supplier contract. I designed the operations system that let us scale from doing 3 events a month to running a commissary kitchen with 12 full-time employees, and a standing contract with 2 hotel chains. I kept the books, managed payroll, handled licensing, and filed every piece of paperwork that kept us in compliance with Tennessee's health and business codes. My husband brought the charm. I built the company. What he never knew, or never paid enough attention to find out, was that I had spent the better part of 2 years, very quietly restructuring how Copper Creek was owned. When we first set up the LLC, we split it 50-50. Equal partners. The way you do when you're in love and trust someone completely. But over the following years, as the warning signs started appearing, and I began to understand where things were heading, I made a series of changes. I purchased additional shares from him incrementally. He signed the paperwork without reading it, which was something he did with everything I put in front of him. I restructured the operating agreement to give the managing member, me, controlling authority over all major decisions, including any transfer of ownership. I moved our flagship service contracts under a set holding company that was solely in my name. I also trademarked our core recipes and our brand name under my personal intellectual property, something my attorney had suggested years before as standard protection, which my husband had waved off as unnecessary. I did it anyway. By the time he made that call in Chicago, he held an 11% minority interest in Copper Creek Provisions. He received profit distributions. He had no control. He could not sell the company. He could not transfer it. He could not dissolve it. He had no idea. I drove home from Nashville's airport on a Thursday evening, and his car was already in the driveway. The lights were on inside. When I walked through the front door, he was in the kitchen. Our kitchen. The one we'd spent a whole summer renovating. and Lila was sitting at the island like she'd been there before. Like she belonged there. She was younger than I expected. She looked nervous, which surprised me. He had that expression on his face. The one that meant he thought he was in control. "We need to talk," he said. I set my bag down by the door. I told him I'd just been on a plane for 2 hours, and I was going to make myself a cup of coffee first. That threw him off a little. I took my time. I opened the cabinet where we kept the good beans, the Ethiopian blend I ordered every month from a roaster in Atlanta. And I ground them while he stood there trying to figure out why I wasn't panicking. Lila had gone very still on her bar stool. "Go ahead," I said when I finally had my mug. He started explaining. About his feelings, about his vision for the future. About wanting to take Copper Creek in a new direction. And how he and Lila had already spoken with a broker about listing the business. And a potential buyer who was very interested. He said all of this with the confidence of a man who has rehearsed his lines, and is certain he knows how the scene ends. I let him finish. Then I opened my briefcase and set a single folder on the island between us. "You can't sell it," I said. He smiled. The way you smile at someone who said something foolish. "It's our company, sweetheart. Half of it is mine." 11%, I said, as of 14 months ago. The smile stayed on his face, but something behind his eyes shifted. I walked him through it calmly. The share purchases, the operating agreement restructuring, the holding company, the trademark registrations. I explained each piece the way you explain something to someone who should have been paying attention but wasn't. I wasn't angry. I wasn't performing a speech. I was just presenting facts. Lila had gone from nervous to something tighter and more careful. She was looking at her phone. "You can't do this," he said. His voice had changed. The rehearsed confidence was gone. "It's already done," I told him. "My attorney filed everything through proper channels. There's nothing to contest." He looked at Lila. She didn't look back. "I think you should both leave," I said. "I'll have my attorney's contact information sent to you tomorrow for the divorce proceedings. I want to be honest about something here before I go further. I did not do that confrontation alone. Before I went home, I called 2 people. My oldest friend, who knew the full situation, and my attorney. Both of them knew exactly where I was going and checked in with me while I was inside. I'm telling you this because I've heard from women who've been in situations where facing the truth was genuinely dangerous. My husband was not a violent man, but I wasn't careless about it. I took precautions. Anyone in a similar situation, please take precautions." He left without another word. The front door closed, and the house was very quiet. I finished my coffee. The next few weeks were not peaceful. I want to be honest about that too. He hired an attorney who specialized in business disputes, and they came at me with everything they had. They argued that the share restructuring had been done without his informed consent, that he hadn't understood what he was signing. My attorney had documentation showing that each transaction was accompanied by a summary memo, written in plain language, that he had initialed and returned. He had signed everything voluntarily, every single time. Then they tried a different angle. They claimed that our long-standing contracts with the 2 hotel co-chains should be considered marital property, regardless of how the corporate structure was arranged, and that he was entitled to a share of their value in the divorce settlement. That was when I brought in the financial records. I had been keeping parallel books for almost 3 years. Every time I noticed a discrepancy, vendor payments that didn't match invoices, travel expenses that didn't correspond to any client meeting I could verify, reimbursement requests for amounts that seemed off. I made a copy and filed it. Not in the office. At home, in a fireproof box in the back of my closet. When my forensic accountant went through everything, the total came to just under $94,000. Drawn out over 31 months in amounts small enough that they didn't trigger automatic alerts. Meals with clients, who turned out not to be clients. Equipment purchases that couldn't be accounted for. Mileage reimbursements for trips our company vehicles hadn't actually made. His attorney got very quiet when that package arrived. The claim that he was entitled to additional marital assets was withdrawn. I never stopped asking myself why I hadn't flagged the discrepancies sooner. Honestly, Because I kept finding reasons not to believe what I was seeing. You build something with someone for 16 years. You don't want to believe the evidence in front of you. And by the time I fully accepted it, I had made a choice. I would document everything thoroughly, and when the moment came, I would be ready. That decision wasn't cold or calculated. It was the decision of someone who needed more time to grieve what was already gone. What I didn't anticipate was Lila. I want to be fair here. I didn't know anything about her when this started. But when my attorney began doing preliminary research in preparation for the business dispute, standard due diligence, some things came up that none of us had expected. Lila had worked for 2 other specialty food businesses in the previous 4 years. One in Memphis and one in Charlotte. In both cases, she had entered into a close personal relationship with a co-owner, and in both cases, within 18 months, the business had been sold and restructured in a way that left the original founders with significantly less than they'd started with. Neither case had resulted in formal charges. The founders had settled quietly, probably exhausted and embarrassed. My attorney shared this history with the Tennessee Department of Revenue, which had already flagged some irregularities in our business filings from the previous 2 years. The years my husband had started handling more of the outward-facing vendor relationships. The IRS followed up shortly after. Felix, my accountant, called me on a Wednesday morning. They're looking at 3 years of filings, he said. The exposure is significant. I asked him what that meant, in practical terms. It means your husband and his girlfriend are going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with federal investigators, he said. And it means you need to make sure your records are airtight. Because they're going to want to understand how the money moved. My records were airtight, they always had been. Our hotel chain partners had heard the rumors by then. Nashville is a small enough business community that things travel fast. I requested in-person meetings with both of them, before anyone else could get there first. I drove to the first meeting alone, walked in, sat down across from their director of event services, a woman I'd worked with for almost 6 years. And I told her the truth. I told her there were disputes in my personal life spilling into the business. I told her my husband was no longer affiliated with Copper Creek in any operational capacity. I told her that our team, our suppliers, and our quality standards had not changed and would not change. She looked at me for a long moment. We've been working with you since the beginning, she said. You're the one who delivers. The second meeting went similarly. By the end of that week, both hotels had signed amended contracts. Directly with me. Under a restructured agreement that removed my husband's name from any point of contact or liability. I heard through my attorney that he had tried to reach out to both hotels directly. They didn't return his calls. Loyalty isn't something you can manufacture or steal. It has to be built over years of showing up and doing what you said you would do. I had done that. He had shown up and smiled. In the end, the difference was everything. The divorce took 14 months. There were depositions and document requests, and 3 different hearings. There were mornings when I woke up at 4 in the morning and lay in the dark, and asked myself whether it was worth it. What kept me going was simpler than I expected. It wasn't anger. I had plenty of that early on. Mostly it was the people who worked for me. 12 employees who had mortgages and kids in school, and plans for their lives that depended on Copper Creek staying open and viable. I had made them a promise implicitly. When I built this thing, I wasn't going to let someone's greed be the reason I broke it. The IRS matter moved on its own timeline, separate from the divorce. I cooperated fully and without hesitation. My records went back further and were more detailed than the investigators had expected. One of them, a serious woman who smiled precisely once during our 3 meetings together, told me I was unusually well organized. I told her I'd had a feeling I might need to be. Leela was the subject of a separate investigation that I won't detail here because it's still ongoing. What I can tell you is that she did not remain in Tennessee. My husband settled. The terms of the divorce gave me full ownership of Copper Creek and its associated entities. He received the equity in our house and a cash payment that came largely from the profit distribution he was still owed as a minority shareholder. A final irony that did not appear to be lost on him. He signed the papers in a conference room and tried to look like none of it mattered. He always had trouble admitting when something mattered. I renamed the business in January. I'd been sitting with the idea for a while, and when the last filing was done, it felt like the right time. Copper Creek Provisions had been us. Whatever came next was going to be mine. I called it Ridgeline Kitchen Co. We kept everything that worked: the team, the supplier relationships, the commissary kitchen, the recipes, all of which had always been mine, legally and factually. What changed was the direction. I expanded our corporate catering arm, which had been underdeveloped for years, because my husband considered it unsexy. I brought on a new operations manager I'd worked with briefly years before, who had been looking to come back to Nashville. By June, we had signed 2 new hotel contracts and added a third on a provisional basis. Our revenue for the year came in 32% above the year before. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because for a long time I had genuinely wondered whether what I'd built actually worked without him. Whether I'd been kidding myself about which one of us was holding things together. That number answered the question I'd been afraid to ask. I still get asked whether I regret not acting sooner. I understand why people ask. Here's what I actually believe. I acted when I had enough. Not enough anger. I had plenty of that early on. Enough evidence. Enough documentation. Enough legal structure in place that when the moment came, I wasn't scrambling. I wasn't reactive. I was ready. That's the part no one tells you about situations like mine. The preparation isn't dramatic. It's spreadsheets at midnight. It's a phone call with an attorney that you mention to no one. It's a fireproof box in a closet. It's reading an operating agreement carefully when your husband has already left the room. Because he finds the details boring. It doesn't feel like strength while you're doing it. But it is. A few months after the papers were signed, I was at a farmer's market in East Nashville, talking to one of my produce suppliers, when a woman I didn't recognize touched my arm. She was maybe 60, with the kind of careful eyes that come from watching things for a long time. "You're the one from Ridgeline," she said. I told her I was. She nodded slowly, like she was deciding something. "My daughter is going through something similar," she said. "What would you tell her?" I thought about it for a moment. "Tell her to document everything," I said. "And don't let anyone convince her that being prepared means she didn't love him. She can love someone and still protect herself. Those aren't the same thing." She wrote it down on the back of a receipt. I don't know what happened after that. I hope it helped. Ridgeline Kitchen Co. is doing well. My employees got raises this year. We're piloting a weekend brunch pop-up series that I've been wanting to do for years but never had the breathing room to try. I hired a pastry specialist last fall who is, honestly, better at croissants than I will ever be, which makes me happy in a way I can't entirely explain. My ex-husband has started a food consulting business. I've heard it's struggled. I don't think about it much. I think about my team. I think about the new hotel partnership we're finalizing. I think about the winter citrus glaze recipe I've been developing that's almost right. Another week, maybe 2, and it'll be where I want it. And sometimes, on quiet Tuesday mornings, I think about a food expo in Chicago, and a phone call that was supposed to end everything. And a woman who said all right and hung up and went back to the business of building something worth keeping. He thought that call was his move. He was wrong. I had already made mine.